know this would be very hard to imagine, but the internet did not exist. I know, shock horror. There was no internet, no Fortnite. It was a dark, cold, lonely, horrible place. But when I was your age, I always imagined that I wanted to write for a living, because that was the thing at school that I enjoyed doing the most. I kind of got through maths, it was all right. Sort of made my way through geography, and that was okay. But it was when I was sitting down and I was in my English classes that I felt like this is the place that I'm meant to be. This is the sort of job that one day I hope I might be able to have. But I couldn't imagine what possible job there would be in the world that would work for. So here I am, some 40 or so years later, and I've worked as a journalist for, I guess, 28 years now of my life, and written a couple of books into the bargain as well. So, as Miss Savage was saying just now, the idea of me being here today is really just to perhaps open your eyes a little bit to the idea or the possibility that if English is something that you like to do, or writing is something that you like to do, there's a very exciting career path that could be ahead of you. So this little presentation is called A Writer's Life with Bryce Corbett, that's me. And if anybody has noticed that I have a similar surname to one of your classmates, it's because I happen to be his father. So we'll get that out of the way early. And if he mucks up, he's under strict instructions not to be cheeky. That's how it goes. So where did it all begin? I, like you guys, was at a school. I grew up in Sydney, and I used to like books. I used to like reading them. I used to like the idea that you could open a book and be transported to a completely different world. I used to think there was a kind of magic in books. I used to love going to libraries. I used to love getting books for Christmas. I used to love just sitting up at night and reading well past my bedtime, because I just got carried away and I just couldn't put the book down. So my love of books began very early. Is anyone familiar with the Tintin books at all? Yeah? Yeah, I used to love those things. I used to read them back to front. And the other series of books that I really liked when I was about your age was Lord of the Rings. Has anybody gotten into any of The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings? Yeah. Again, another amazing example of how you can create an entire world just from your imagination. So I used to read a lot of books when I was your age, when I was younger. And of course I would be at school, and like you guys, I would have to do writing tests. And you know that writing assignment that you would do and you would think, what is the point? Like, where is this actually going to go? A bit like algebra. But the point is that you can, in fact, create a career out of writing, because that is, in fact, a job. Now, this slide is called Stop Press, but I don't imagine anybody knows what that is a reference to. These things, newspapers, are produced on a printing press. And it used to be the case, if there was a late-breaking news story and they had to get it into the newspaper, they would say, "Stop press," because that was a really important news story that they had to shove into the next day's newspaper. That's still the case. Newspapers still get printed on printing machines, although more and more people obviously are consuming their news now on the internet. And so fewer and fewer people are buying the newspapers, but they still serve a really important function in terms of getting daily news out to people. So I discovered that, in fact, there are jobs for people who like writing, who are good at writing, and journalism is one of those jobs. So, of course, it's not just newspapers that need people to write. Television stations, radio stations, internet sites, everything from the nightly news, from the Channel 9 nightly news through to BTN, all need real human beings like yourselves to write the content that goes into them every single day. So I began my career, and this one's especially for Flynn because I know how utterly embarrassed he'll be by this photograph. That was me when I started out as a journalist at the Daily Telegraph newspaper in Sydney. And that wasn't actually my desk. It wasn't that messy. That was set up for a photograph. Because that looks a little bit like Flynn's bedroom. And so I began as a cadet journalist, which is like an apprenticeship, if you like, or a traineeship to become a journalist at a newspaper. That was back in the 1990s, hence the dreadful hairdo and the questionable fashion choice. But that was where I learned to be a journalist and to write stories for the newspaper. So every single day, whether it's the Courier Mail or the Australian or whether it's your favourite website, every single day there are stories being written to fill up the pages of the newspaper or the pages of a website or whatever it may be. Now, if you look at it, how many words do you think are in these newspapers? This is just today's newspaper. There'll be hundreds of thousands of words in today's newspaper. So the very act of putting this out every single day requires, I think Courier Mail would probably have about 200 journalists who are all working every single day to write the words, to go into the newspaper so that you can pick it up in the morning and read it and find out what's going on in the world. It's a massive, massive enterprise. And it means that you need to have people going down to the courtroom, because there's a big court, there's several courtrooms here in Brisbane, and every single day in those courtrooms there are stories happening in those courtrooms that are either interesting or scandalous or really important and significant for us to know about because it's going to have an impact upon our lives. There's also obviously Parliament House. So down at Parliament House here in Brisbane, where all the politicians that you see droning on the news every single night, they're down there every day, they're making the decisions that will impact upon your life. And as a journalist or a reporter, we are there to tell you what's going on, why it's important for you to know about it, and what impact it'll have on your life. So journalism, reporters, the media serves a really, really important function in our society and in our democracy. It's a really important pillar of what it is to live in a democracy. It's also a way to really, is that my timer? It's also, being a journalist is also a way to annoy people, as you can see. It's one of those professions where you serve probably quite an important function, but in the execution of that particular job, you can sometimes upset and annoy people. As you can see, the famous media scrum, the desire of the journalist to get the story and to get it quickly. In the course of my job, so I've worked, began at a newspaper, and then I worked in magazines, and I now work for 60 Minutes on television. So in the course of my job, one of the great things about it is you get to meet fascinating people. Because all of these people, these are all people who I've met and interviewed. And every single one of them is somebody, you probably know some of the faces in there. Each one of them will come and meet with a journalist, and talk to a journalist, because if it was, say, Hugh Jackman or Nicole Kidman or Keith Urban, they all had like a movie that they wanted the world to know about, or they were promoting particular products, or Angelina Jolie. Julia Gillard, you might remember back in the mists of time, about 20 Prime Ministers ago, was our Prime Minister. She was the first female Prime Minister. I was working at the time for the Australian Women's Weekly magazine, and we did a big interview with her. I'm not sure how many of you will be old enough to recognise this lady down here. Oh, you do? There you go. All right. Well, she came to Australia about 20 years ago, and I met and interviewed her there. And then, of course, top right, Turia Pitts. Anyone familiar with Turia? Yeah? So Turia is another one of the amazing people that I've had the great privilege of meeting, spending time with, and interviewing, in this instance, for the Australian Women's Weekly. People often say, what is it that you like most about your job? And easily, hands down, it is this. It is getting to meet really interesting people and ask them questions that perhaps sometimes they don't want you to ask them, in some cases, or ask them questions that they've never really thought about, and perhaps haven't really thought about what the answer to it would be, but you get them to think about and to articulate what their thinking might be on that. And then, culturally, if you talk about the Nicole Kidmans and Hugh Jackmans, you get to just hang out with movie stars, so that's kind of fun too. So meeting interesting people is definitely one of the great perks of a job like mine. The other one is that it's a job that you can travel with. And I've been very lucky and very privileged to be able to have worked in lots of different parts of the world, because that's the nature of a journalist. You go where the story is. I moved to London when I was maybe just in my 30s. I moved to London after many years of working at a newspaper. I thought, right, it's time to go. I'm going over to London, which is what many Australians do. And I spent 2 years there working at newspapers and working in a television station in the UK. And then eventually, because I had studied French at school and university, I figured it was time to move across to Paris. And I moved to Paris thinking I would spend a year in Paris, but I ended up spending 10, because that is Paris. It sucks you in, and you're very happy to remain there. Whilst in Paris, I wrote 2 books. This one, Sound Like Paris, and this one, Memoirs of a Showgirl. Now, before I talk a little bit about the art of writing, this is a book about my life living in Paris as a young man, a young Australian who had moved to Paris on a wing and a prayer. And it falls into a category of writing called the memoir. Does anybody know what the memoir is? James?
When you and then you write something about how they felt in that situation.
Almost. We're going to come to that. Memoir, like the name suggests, is memory. So it is a memoir. It's about my recollections. It's about the author's recollections of being somewhere or doing something, or it's often used to describe a style of writing when people write about their life. So it's a memoir, which is like taking account of a particular time and place. And in my case, that was the 10 years that I had been living in Paris. Whilst living in Paris, I met this young lady, who is Flynn's mother, Shay. And she was dancing at the Moulin Rouge, which is a cabaret show in Paris. And we sat down together because Shay had grown up in Brizzy and had gone to, any of you girls or boys go to dance schools? Yeah? Excellent. Do a bit of jazz, a little bit of ballet, a little bit of hip hop. So Shay used to do that when she was a young girl. She grew up in Tarragindi, and she used to go to her church hall and do her dance classes every week. And she ended up dancing at the Moulin Rouge. So we sat down and wrote a book together because we thought, what an amazing story. A story about a young girl who grows up in Brisbane and ends up dancing in Paris, in one of the most famous stages in the world. So Memoirs of a Showgirl was the book that we wrote together. I wonder if that's the ghost of the Moulin Rouge knocking that over. This style of writing is what James was just referring to. This is called biography. So this is where I wrote this book, but it's about Shay's life. So it's an exercise where you sit down and you interview the person, and you find out about their life, and then you write about it. And it's called biography. Now, there's also a genre of writing which is called autobiography. Does anybody know what that would be? Yeah?
It's when you write about yourself.
Absolutely. It's when you write about yourself. An autobiography, which is similar in style to this. It's a story which is about me, basically written by me. What is it that you need to do or be in order to be an author? The most important thing when it comes to writing is observing. And that means being a good listener more than anything else in the world. Being a really acute observer, sitting back, watching how people react, watching how people act, listening to the things they say, and taking it all in and processing it and turning it into a book. You have to be curious about the people and places around you. If you're the kind of person that is curious about the why, if you're the sort of person who asks why a lot, or you often look at things, or you look at people and you think, I wonder why they did that, or I wonder why they said that, then it's exactly the sort of skill that you require to be a writer, or a journalist for that matter. You have to be curious about people and places around you, and curiosity is so important. You have to take an interest in the people around you. You have to take an interest in why it is that people do the things that they do, or say the things they say. And probably, and this is something perhaps as a parent that I would suggest, is that it's really important to look up from your screens. I will take the bus or the train occasionally into work, and I see people head buried in screens, and that's great because there's a world in there. I get it, but what you're missing when you're looking here is the world that's going on around you. And might I suggest the world that's going on around you is the real world compared to a lot of what's going on down in here. You have to be curious about the world around you. You have to want to understand why it is that the world around you does the things that it does. So, biography we've spoken about a little bit, and the art of writing somebody else's story. And this is especially important, the art of listening. Because you can ask a person a question, but so often in life, people will ask you a question, or you will ask somebody a question, but you don't really listen to the answer, or you're aware that they're not really listening to your answer. Or in fact, an answer might be given to you, but it's only half of the answer, because the person, for whatever reason, might want to only give away a little bit, or might be uncomfortable about telling the whole story, or may have 100 different reasons as to why they give you the answer they do. So the art of listening is so important, because you have to expect when you ask somebody a question, you've got to be thinking, now what will be their motivation in the answer they give me? What are the different things going on in their life right now that would suggest that they would give me answer A, answer B, or answer C? And how far do I go in trying to get to the truth, such as it is, of what it is that they're saying? So when you're talking to people, or when you're interviewing people, especially for books or for newspapers or magazines, you've got to always be listening very carefully, and listening not just to what they say, but being very aware of their body language. When they reply, are they looking away? When they answer, are they looking down? Are they clearly uncomfortable about a certain question that you're asking them? If they're uncomfortable, why would that be? Have they told you something that you know is not quite true? It's a really gentle art of conversation at the end of the day. And the thing that I have found in 25 plus years of journalism and writing is people are very rarely offended if you ask them deeply personal questions. Or if they are, they'll let you know, and you know that it's time to back off. But the thing that's really been most striking, I think, for me, is that for the most part, people are just happy that someone's interested in them. And people will speak to you because it's so rare that they have an opportunity to talk about themselves, and so rare that they actually get somebody who's genuinely interested and is listening properly to their answers. The third genre of writing is called ghostwriting, which is similar in some respects to what I did with Memoirs of a Showgirl. And these are two books that I wrote. This is the young reader's edition of the Turia book. This is called ghostwriting. So these books basically have been sold as having been written by Rosie Batty or written by Turia Pitt. Neither of these women, as amazing and accomplished as they are writers. So they asked me if I would sit down with them and write their story, but in their voice. So you guys understand first person, second person. So when you're writing and you use first person constructions like I did this and I thought that. So I wrote both of these women's books in their voice. And that's another skill again, because you have to get inside their head. And not only do you need to get inside their head to think about, well, what were they thinking at each point of their particular life story, but you also have to capture their voice. So when you're writing, capturing somebody's voice is a really important thing to do. So the way that this book is written sounds different to the way that this book is written, because obviously these are two very different people, and they have two very different ways of speaking, and they have two very different ways of thinking. And when you're writing their story, you have to get inside their head, and you have to listen to the way they speak, and you have to listen to the words they use, and you have to replicate that when you sit down to write their story in first person. So ghostwriting is another form of writing that's very popular. You see books by Jonathan Thurston, Michael Clark, any books really by your sports people. These guys and girls are really, really good at kicking balls. They're not so good at putting words on paper. So they will often get a journalist or a writer to write their story. Writing is a tough thing to do. More than anything else, it's a lonely thing to do, because you sit there often with your computer and the screen and it's blank and that cursor's blinking away at you and you think, right, 120,000 words to go. And so you sit down there and you have to have an enormous amount of discipline. These books here, I think this is 180,000 words, this was 180,000 words, both of these are 120,000 words. That's a lot of words, and it's a lot of time spent sitting down and thinking about what you're going to write and planning it and structuring it and working out how the story that you write has some sort of natural arc. Do you understand what I mean when I say an arc? You want to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I'm sure you've all heard that before when you're talking about how you construct a story. You want to have some sense of a journey. I hate that word. Can't believe I just said it, but there you are. You want to take the reader from somewhere at the beginning of the story and take them through a process and take them through the life of whoever it is that you're writing about and arrive at some sort of a destination at the end. And so you have to sit down and think very carefully about how you're going to structure that particular journey. The same way that on a television show, you will have so you're watching a series, and at the end of the series, there is some sort of a cliffhanger at the end. You know what a cliffhanger is? That's where you get to the end of the series and think, I've got to read the next chapter, or I've got to see the next episode. It's the same process when you're writing. You have to think about how you're going to structure every single chapter so that when you get to the end of it, you want to compel the person who's reading it to turn the page and keep going, and keep the light on and stay up for another hour when they should probably be asleep.
Stop drawing, please.
It also requires discipline, obviously, because you need to sit at a computer when all you would rather do is watch Netflix. Because yes, adults would prefer to watch Netflix than go to work, but unfortunately we can't. Persistence is also really important. This is a lesson for anybody, no matter what line of work it is that you end up going into, because you will suffer rejection. You will put forward ideas in books that people will go, yeah, no thanks. You will write things that people say are not appropriate, or the editors that you're working with say, no, you have to go back and do that again. It requires an enormous amount of self-belief, because there's a lot of opportunity when you're sitting in a room by yourself with a blank screen and a blinking cursor to doubt yourself. You can say, I don't know why I'm doing this, because I've lost interest in it, so I can't imagine why anybody else is going to take any interest in it. But you need to keep pushing through, because you've committed to tell the story, and so you sit down and you do it. And it requires a quality that I learned a lot about from this lady here, Turia Pitt, and that is the quality of resilience. One of the great pleasures of sitting down with somebody like Turia to write a book is that you were reminded on a daily basis that as hard as you think your life is, as hard as you think things that you're going through, they're nothing compared to the sorts of things that some people are able to endure and triumph over. Turia, her resilience, her strength, and her extremely good humour are things that I feel very, very privileged and honoured to have spent as much time with as I have. And then, of course, storytelling can also be done outside of books. So at the moment I work for a television program called 60 Minutes, which maybe some of you know. It's not on Netflix, maybe none of you know it. It's a television current affairs program. And it also requires the same skills that you build up when you are writing newspapers, when you're writing books, or if you're writing for television. You have to write scripts, you have to tell a story, you have to tell this person's story, you have to, in the art of interviewing, you have to work out how it is to get the best out of somebody in an interview. And that is another skill that has been developed in my years as a writer.